Next, let's look over on the vendor. Vendor management is picked up off of accounts payable, and it's pretty straightforward. You have a vendor account number, vendor company, an alternate account number, a name, a status, your customer account at that vendor, the buyer. The pay cycle is used for generating accounts payable runs. The pay class allows you to pick groups of invoices or vendors to pay. Language, a couple of phone numbers, a vendor type. Is it a expense vendor, inventory vendor, services vendor? When the vendor was set inactive, by who and why. Then the vendor address with mapping and validation, and then a remit to address if you send the check to some other place other than the vendor. Purchasing information, terms, credit limit, tax ID number, tax rate, tax type, how the vendor invoices you by EDI, whether you automatically pay the vendor or it requires a manual intervention, and whether you or not you get statements from this vendor. Then default PO information, ship via terms, whether or not you accept back orders or partials, what the lead days are from this vendor, the PO method you can use. Some people require written POs, some faxed, currency, and then a default where you charge invoices from this vendor to, what GL account, the AP clerk, and the accounts payable control account that invoices entered for this vendor get charged to. Statistics for the vendor, purchases month to date, quarter to date, year to date, total, trend, what you currently have on order, last invoice amount, last payment from you, current balance, the balance date, pending, vendor accounts receivable, and RAs open. This RAs open means you sent $30 worth of RAs to the vendor that you're waiting for credits for. Demographics, if the vendor is the manufacturer, co-op advertising amount, and some free form fields. Code, standard inventory classification, class, sex, size, minority, which are used for if you are required to do government reporting on how much you buy from women-owned companies or minority-owned companies. Some notes, the usual set of comments, and then vendor contacts. Vendor contacts are very similar to customer contacts, all the same fields. Site data, this is site-specific data. You can name these fields whatever you want. And an eCommerce access code. This is if you have the vendor eCommerce module, it will, the code that they use to get into it. Entity information, just like on the customer side, what type of entity it is, and a federal and state number. And then our attributes for adding whatever other information we need to the vendor. You can look at vendor invoices, the invoice history, and then you can do a couple of things off the vendor invoice lookup. You can pay the invoice, and that lets you identify that a payment's been made, whether or not it's a check or wire. You can apply credit memos. If you have a credit memo from a vendor, you can apply it to an open invoice, and you can assign an invoice. Assigning invoice is a very useful feature. Let's say, for example, a printer breaks and you send somebody out to Best Buy to pick up a printer and they put it on their personal credit card. When they come back with the invoice is from Best Buy. So you really want to record that and scan it as a Best Buy invoice with the vendor being Best Buy. So when you enter the AP invoice, you'll click the Assign checkbox, and then as soon as you save the invoice to Best Buy, it'll pop up and say, who do you want to assign this to? And you'll then assign it to the person whose credit card was used so that the accounts payable is to that person and not to Best Buy. This lets you record who the actual vendor was and who you owed the money for buying the product. Then you can look at inventory activity, which will be receipts for the vendor invoice, and you can select it if it's a situation where the invoice is going to be used for something. You can track payments to that to that vendor. You can track purchase orders, open and closed, and you can enter an accounts payable invoice. And we'll go through the accounts payable when we do the training on the accounts payable module.